So thank you first. Thank you very much for being here, for coming to Spain too. You're very welcome. I hope that this is not your last visit in the next years, and we can create something good out of this being one. So hopefully we'll see you around next time. If not, in some other country would be fine too.
This is not my first visit to Spain, and it will not be my last. I think this is a very important conference, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm honored to receive the invitation. I think it's important that we have this kind of a conference now because of what's happening in the world right now.
Yeah, let me go with the first question that that is related with being one and this type of conferences, books. In what sense do you think this type of events or books or writings or satsangs do you think are useful for people for going in their inner path and self-discover themselves? How do you think that these type of things would relate to their own personal achievements? Do you think this influence positively? What's your view on this?
I think the Being One conference is a beautiful example of precisely the kind of gatherings that are needed right now. We live in a world where we're being pulled apart, we're being polarized, we're being told that we're separate by economies, by religion, by culture, and people are feeling the need to come together and find the common ground that brings us together as a human family. So I think the books, the videos, the conferences like Being One, what they do is they reinforce in our hearts something that we already sense is true, but the world doesn't always reflect that. So it is a way to create a community of people that come together to reinforce the deepest truths of human connection and human oneness. And I think that is the value of coming to a conference like this. The speakers that will be presenting the material, each speaker is presenting something very different, but the common thread is that it is all about our connection, all about our connection to ourselves first, and then to one another, then to the earth, to all life, and for us to thrive in the time of extremes where we find ourselves right now, we must first find this connection with ourselves.
Excellent. And let me ask you another question. For these people who is like starting in their, let's say, self-development world or spiritual path or whatever, what type of advice would you give them? People who is starting with their yoga classes, or they are starting to read some of your books or some other author, what would you suggest them in order to progress in their inner path?
Sure. Well, people ask me a question all the time. They say, I am just beginning on my path. What do you recommend? And what I know is that they are not just beginning. If you live in this world, you are already on the path. If you live in this world, you are already in this experience. So it's not about just beginning, it's about recognizing what's true for an individual, what's true for you. We are told in the language of science, we are told a story about ourselves, about our relationship to the earth, where we come from, and new discoveries, new scientific discoveries are now overturning 150 years of scientific thinking, and they're telling us that the story that we've been told is no longer true. We have been taught that we live in a world of separation, competition, and conflict. It's often called the dog-eat-dog world. And the new science now is telling us that simply is not true, that nature is actually based upon a model of cooperation and what scientists call mutual aid. So we, for 150 years, have been taught this false story of competition, conflict, and separation. The world that we have around us is built upon that story. It's the economic system, the way that we solve our problems between nations, the way that we share resources like food and water and medicine. All of those ideas are based upon the false assumptions of separation, competition, and conflict, and they are breaking down because they are no longer sustainable. So as the old systems break down, we have an opportunity now to look at the deep truth of what the new science is showing us and rebuild those systems, rebuild the economy, rebuild the way we think of borders and language and culture, rebuild all of these based upon the truth of cooperation in nature rather than the competition and separation.
Sounds good. I read that you have a very solid scientific background, and it's very well. You have been many years doing research and working in this type of innovation, things like that. I'm wondering, what's your view on how spirituality and science can work together? I mean, it could be science like a path for going into spirituality too, or you think the other way around? Do you think it's through spirituality you can reach science too? How do you think they relate?
I am a scientist. I'm a degreed geologist and earth scientist. I have a background in oceanography and mathematics, computer science, and marine biology. And they all work together beautifully for me to help me understand the world. When it comes to science and spirituality, I was told that the two are mutually exclusive. I was told that I cannot follow the path of science and the path of spirituality. My belief is that there is no separation between science and spirituality. When I was a young boy, I was raised in a very conservative community in the middle of the United States. It's a state called Missouri, in a rural area, lots of farms. We didn't talk about science and spirituality. So I believed that everyone else believed the same thing that I believed, and I believed that there was no separation between science and spirituality. So when I studied geology, chemistry, physics, biology, in my mind I was studying little pieces of a spiritual reality. So I always believed that there was no separation, that it was a very spiritual experience to study the sciences. Now, what I find, I'm in my 60s now, so 60 years later, science is coming full circle. And the deeper the scientists study the world of the quantum world, for example, or the deeper the scientists move into the realms of the cosmos, the more spiritual their understandings become. A perfect example. Quantum physics. Back in the old days, we studied the atom. There was the electron, the proton, the nucleus, and we thought that was complex. Now we have quarks, and we have not only quarks, but the quarks have names like up quark, down quark, truth quark, beauty quark. And those are very, very spiritual kinds of names for a scientific particle. So I think the more that the scientists delve into the reality of our physical world, the more that they begin to understand that we are part of that world, and this is where the spiritual understanding comes in.
Interesting. Can we talk a bit, I mean, I don't want to extend too much because there's some colleagues that want to come afterwards, but
sure.
It's very interesting for me to know about the connection between heart and mind, and how they are electronically or electrically through waves connected, because that's neuroscience is doing a very big evolution in the last few years, and it seems like the old mystics have a lot of
sure.
insight on that, and it seems that there is a very powerful connection between heart and mind. And what is, in your opinion, that connection and how that is being shown up?
In 1991, a new discovery changed the way we think about the human heart, and it was the discovery of 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart. They are like neurons of the brain, but they're in the heart. They're called sensory neurites. What it began to tell the scientists is that our hearts do more than simply pump blood, that our hearts think independently of the brain in our head. They feel independently of the brain in our head. They remember independently of the brain in our head. So we are all conditioned. We know how to use our brain, our cranial brain. We're very good at that. In many ancient and indigenous traditions, they're taught to use their heart in a very similar way, to think and feel and make decisions through their heart. Now, what science is discovering is that we can merge these two. We can marry the heart and the brain together, two different organs, one extended neural network. We can marry them together to give us extraordinary experiences of deep intuition, of access to the anti-aging hormones in our body, the trigger to over 1,300 biochemical reactions, positive biochemical reactions, very powerful immune response, super learning. All of these things come from merging the heart and the brain together. So now science has arrived at where many ancient and indigenous traditions began, and that is with the utilization of the heart and the brain together to tune us to our environment and to one another so that we can thrive in this world and not just survive in this world.
That's good. Can we talk a bit about death? Because we're working in this sense because many people experience so much death, and it seems that is something which is hiding in our actual society. Somebody wants to talk about that. It seems that there is a lot of fear on that. What's your view on that, and what type of advice would you give to people who is really facing this moment of their lives when this is coming to an end? And what would you tell them? And how do you understand death itself?
You're asking, those are 4 different questions.
Yeah.
So you're asking what advice I would give to someone who's facing death right now?
Yeah.
When we talk about the experience of death, it's of course something that everyone will experience at some point. The question is, how do we experience it? Do we experience it through fear, or do we experience it through acceptance? I think the more that we talk about it, the more that we understand it, the easier it comes. What the science is now telling us, and what our ancestors have told us for a very long time, is that death is not the end. It is a continuation. It is another part of the journey. We do not end at the time that our body ends. And the best science of the modern world is now beginning to confirm this. The experiments are showing that something continues, not the physical body, but the consciousness. And as we can prepare ourselves for that consciousness, in that shift, we actually find a freedom that allows us to learn in an even greater way, to love in a deeper way.
Can we have, I know you've been talking about this question that I'm gonna make you now very often. I saw some other videos on YouTube, whatever, that you already mentioned something related to how thoughts connect to reality, but maybe you can give another point of view. It seems like sometimes we all talk, things come from our mind, sometimes not a deep feeling and a deep thought comes from inside. Maybe you can give us another point of view of how you think thoughts create reality. Yeah. And we can understand a bit more on your view on that.
Yeah, I've often heard it said that thoughts create reality. I typically don't believe that thoughts create reality. It is what we believe that creates the reality. It's the belief, not the thinking. The belief is something that we hold in our heart. The thought is something that we hold in our mind. So this is why when we say an affirmation, for example, we can say an affirmation 1,000,000 times that my perfect mate is manifesting for me now. You can say those words. That's an empty thought until we give it the fuel of the emotion. So the thought is empty without the power of the emotion to give it energy, and that is what is reflected in our world. There's a field of energy that connects all things, and that field is a mirror in the world around us, and that field mirrors to us what we claim to believe in our hearts, not necessarily what we think in our minds. This is a subtle and it's a powerful difference that is taught. A lot of New Age thinking is all about the thought, and people get into trouble because they become ill and they say, I'm going to think myself well, and the thought is not enough to make them well. But this is where the nuance, the subtle nuance of the ancient and the indigenous traditions is important, because when we spend time with our indigenous ancestors, they will tell us very clearly it's what we feel, it's the emotion of the feeling, and we're invited to feel the feeling as if our desire has already come true. as if our prayer is already answered, as if the healing is already happened, as if our abundance is already present. When we can feel that feeling as if it's already there, that is what this field responds to. It will mirror it back in our world and our lives. Science bears that out, and I talk about that in the book The Divine Matrix, about the experiments, that peer-reviewed science showing how our beliefs literally interact on a quantum level with our physical reality. That's a good question.
Yeah. I think we're running out of time.
Okay.
We
have
really thank you your time here. I mean, you're welcome to Spain again, and hopefully you have a few days good here. And we're going to be around for Conscious TV. So I mean, you're.
Are you coming to? I think Milano next year is.
Being One.
Being One is in Milan.
Hopefully, yeah.
So maybe I will see you in Milan.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.